The first time my card got declined, I thought it was just a glitch. I was standing at the grocery store checkout, a line of tired faces behind me, and the cashier said softly, "Ma'am, it's saying insufficient funds." I laughed a little, embarrassed. "Try it again, sugar. That card's older than you, but it's never failed me."
She did.
It failed again. Right there, holding a carton of milk and a bag of flour, something cold and heavy sat in my chest. I'd worked 40 years of my life, never bounced a check, never owed a soul. And yet, somehow, my account was empty. My name is Marjorie Whitfield. I'm 68 years old, and I've always believed that when you do right by your child, the world rewards you in kind. I believed that right up until my daughter, Danielle, proved me wrong. I raised Danielle by myself after my husband, Raymond, passed. He was a postman, a quiet, gentle man who loved jazz and warm biscuits. When he died, Danielle was just 10. I worked double shifts as a teacher and still came home to cook, iron, and help her study. I wanted her to have the kind of life I'd never had: freedom, comfort, the chance to dream big. She was smart, sharp-tongued even as a teenager. "Mama, you too slow with all that paper," she'd say, rolling her eyes at my checkbook. "Nobody uses that anymore." I'd smile and say, "Well, this slow paper put you through college, Missy." And it did. I paid every dime. No loans, no debt. Watching her walk across that graduation stage, I thought I'd done something good in this world. I thought she was my greatest investment. Turns out, investments can betray you too. A few months before that grocery store moment, Danielle had started coming around more often. She lived in Atlanta, a 30-minute drive from me, but I'd see her almost every weekend now. "Just checking on my favorite lady," she'd say, showing up with her laptop and fancy coffee. One afternoon, she set her mug on the kitchen table and said, "Mama, we gotta update your online stuff. Your bank, your phone, your bills, everything. Scammers out here wild these days." I squinted at her over my glasses. "I've been doing just fine." "I know, but you're using the same password for everything. Probably your birthday, right?" she teased. "Maybe," I muttered. She giggled, typing fast. "See, that's what I mean. You need strong passwords and two-step verification. Let me handle it, Mama. I do this all the time for clients." I didn't like handing over my laptop, but she looked so sure of herself, my baby, so grown and capable. Her long braids brushed her shoulders as she worked. I watched her type my name, my numbers, my life into that machine like it was nothing. When she was done, she looked up proud. "All set. Don't worry, Mom. I'll handle your online stuff." That line stuck with me. "Don't worry, Mom. I'll handle your online stuff." If only I'd known what handle really meant. 2 weeks later, little things started going wrong. My phone buzzed with text alerts I didn't understand. "Transaction complete. New device logged in." Danielle said it was just system updates. Then the power bill came late. Then the water bill doubled. And then, that morning in the grocery store, my card failed. I went home with tears burning behind my eyes. Danielle wasn't picking up her phone. So I sat on my porch, looked at my hydrangeas swaying in the breeze, and told myself to breathe. I'd always been the kind of woman who kept calm when others panicked. But inside, something twisted tight. I went to the bank the next day in my Sunday dress, pressed and proper. The teller, a young man with soft brown skin and nervous hands, checked my account. He frowned, then leaned in. "Ma'am, I see several large withdrawals this month. Around $12,000 total."
"12 what?"
I stammered. "That can't be right." He showed me the screen. Transfers, online payments, digital authorizations. My heart pounded so hard I thought the counter might shake. Every withdrawal was authorized under my name.
"But it wasn't me."
I left that bank numb. The world outside looked different, quieter somehow, like sound had been sucked out of it. When Danielle finally came by that evening, she was humming like nothing had happened. "Hey, Mama," she said, kissing my cheek. "Sit down," I told her.
My voice was calm.
Too calm. She blinked, sensing something. "Everything okay?" You tell me, I said, sliding the printout from the bank across the table. Her face flickered, just for a second. Then she smiled.
Oh, that.
Yeah, I moved some money around for investments. You'll get it back with interest, I promise. I stared at her. You moved my retirement savings without telling me? Mama, it's still yours. I'm just managing it smarter. You don't need to worry about all that boring stuff. You said yourself, I'm good with tech and finance. You didn't ask me, I said quietly. She rolled her eyes, frustrated. You always make a big deal out of nothing. I'm trying to help you. You don't even understand how banking works these days. Her words stung worse than any slap could have. She looked at me, saw I wasn't yelling, and smirked like she'd won something. Trust me, Mom. I know what I'm doing. I smiled a little. I'm sure you do. But deep down, I felt a shift, a quiet, cold understanding that my daughter had stopped seeing me as her mother. To her, I was just an account, a name on paper, a resource. That night, I sat in bed, unable to sleep. My old clock ticked loudly in the silence. I thought about every sacrifice I'd made, the extra jobs, the nights grading papers until my eyes burned, the times I went without new shoes so she could have prom dresses and college textbooks. And now, the same hands I once held to cross the street had typed away my savings. My fingers trembled as I whispered to the dark, "Why, baby, why'd you do that to me?" But there was no answer, just the hum of the fridge and the ache in my chest.
I didn't sleep much after that night.
The next morning, I put on my Sunday hat and walked to the library. The librarian, Miss Carroll, smiled. "Morning, Marjorie. How can I help you today?" "I need to learn," I said. "Everything about online banking, passwords, whatever you call it. My daughter's been helping me too much." She chuckled, then saw the look on my face. Her smile faded. "All right then," she said. "Let's start from the beginning." She showed me how to make new emails, how to check devices logged into accounts, how to change passwords. I wrote everything down on a yellow notepad, like a schoolgirl. By lunchtime, my brain hurt, but I felt something I hadn't in months. Power. It wasn't much, but it was mine. When I left the library, I looked up at the sky. A thin breeze carried the scent of magnolias. And right there on that corner, I made myself a promise. I wasn't going to yell. I wasn't going to beg. I wasn't even going to warn her. I was going to learn every trick she thought I couldn't. Because sometimes, revenge isn't loud, it's patient. Weeks passed. Danielle texted here and there, asking if I needed anything. I kept it short. "I'm fine, baby. You?" Meanwhile, I was busy moving what little remained of my funds into a new account under my maiden name, Marjorie Brooks. The name I had before Raymond, before motherhood, before every sacrifice that left me invisible. I filed new pension details, updated my contacts, even bought a new phone, cheap, simple, but mine. And when the last step was done, I sat on my porch with a cup of tea and watched the sunset. For the first time in months, I felt light. Danielle thought she had taken everything from me, but she didn't know the woman who raised her came from nothing twice and built everything from scratch both times. She had no idea that her little old mama was about to teach her the lesson of a lifetime. They say hell hath no fury like a woman scorned, but they've never met a mother who's been betrayed by her own child. If this story touches your heart or reminds you of something real, go ahead and like this video, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you don't miss the next part. And tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I love knowing how far these stories travel. The first time I saw Danielle cry over money, I should have felt relief. But instead, something cold and tight curled in my chest like a fist. She came bursting through my front door one Friday evening, her designer heels clicking against my hardwood floors. Her face was pale, her eyes wide and frantic. "Mama, you won't believe this," she gasped, clutching her phone like it might explode in her hands. "The IRS, my business, they froze everything. They think I committed tax fraud." I leaned against the doorway, my fingers tracing the frame as if the wood itself could steady me. I didn't speak right away. I just studied her. My little girl, the one I had sacrificed everything for, was standing in front of me like a frightened animal caught in a trap of her own making. I felt no sympathy. Not yet. Danielle, I said softly, my voice calm, steady, deceptively gentle. Sit down. Tell me everything from the beginning. She collapsed into the armchair in the living room, her laptop clattering onto the side table. I don't know what happened. I checked the accounts, the transfers, everything was fine yesterday, Mama. I don't understand how this could happen. I poured her a glass of water, careful not to let my hands shake. Maybe you should have checked twice, I said, then added, almost casually, sometimes, what seems fine isn't really fine at all. She looked at me like I'd grown a second head. Mama, what are you talking about? I sat across from her, folding my hands neatly on my lap. I'm talking about responsibility, baby. About thinking before you touch what doesn't belong to you. Her eyes darted around the room, panic creeping in. I didn't do anything wrong. I just thought I was helping. You don't understand the way these things work. Digital banking, investments, tech. I let her ramble for a while, letting the fear and self-justifications pour out of her like a broken faucet. She needed the catharsis, I realized. She needed to scream, to blame herself, before she could even begin to understand the storm she had unleashed. You are helping yourself, not me, I said finally, and the words felt like ice on my tongue. What? Her voice cracked. You heard me, I said, standing and walking over to the window. Everything you touched, you moved, manipulated, and claimed.
You didn't help me, Danielle. You took.
And now, the walls are closing in on you. She swallowed hard, her nails digging into her palms. I didn't mean to. Intentions don't erase consequences. I interrupted, and my voice carried a quiet authority that made her flinch. You always thought I wouldn't notice, that I'd sit back and let you manage my life for your convenience. But I saw everything. For a moment, the room was silent except for the soft whir of my ceiling fan. I watched her, really watched her, and saw the shock and fear in her eyes. My own daughter, who once looked at me with admiration, was now realizing that I wasn't the same woman she had grown up knowing. Why didn't you tell me this was your plan? I asked, my voice low, deliberate. Why didn't you warn me? I wasn't, Mama. I wasn't thinking. I thought it was okay because it was my name, too. She wailed, her voice breaking. Your name? I asked, incredulous. Do you even know the meaning of responsibility? Do you know what it means to risk someone else's life for your own convenience? She didn't answer. She couldn't. The realization had begun to sink in, slowly, painfully. I walked over to my dining table and opened a drawer, pulling out my checkbook and a few old letters. Do you remember when I worked double shifts, when I skipped meals, when I didn't sleep so you could have prom dresses, textbooks, a safe life? I asked. My voice cracked slightly, but I didn't stop. Do you remember all the sacrifices I made so you could have everything I never had? Her tears fell freely now. Mama? You don't get to say it now, I said, holding up a hand. You've had every advantage in this world. Every chance. And you chose to exploit it, not just for yourself, but against me. She buried her face in her hands, and I sat down across from her. I wanted to let the rage out, the hurt that had been building for months since I realized the depth of her betrayal. But I held it back. Patience, I reminded myself. Patience was sharper than any anger. Do you know what I've been doing while you thought you were in control? I asked softly. Her head lifted slightly. What do you mean? I've been learning, I said, a small, calm smile tugging at the corner of my lips. I've been teaching myself the ways of the system you thought I couldn't understand. I've been reclaiming control over what is mine, Danielle. Slowly, quietly, without drama. Her eyes widened. Mama, you. Yes, I said, leaning back. I am. Every account, every password, every little digital footprint you thought gave you power over me. I've traced it, reversed it, and secured it. She gasped, standing abruptly. How that's impossible. You can't do that. You're not your. I am a woman who's been underestimated her whole life, I said, my voice steady and unwavering. You are so busy thinking about yourself, thinking about what you could gain, that you didn't even see me preparing. You didn't even imagine I had the strength, the patience, or the knowledge to turn the tables. The panic in her eyes was palpable now, and I realized I had her exactly where I wanted her. Not broken, not humiliated yet, but aware. Aware that she had underestimated her mother. You're going to have to face the consequences of your choices, I said. And I am not going to fight you with anger or bitterness. I will let your own actions bring the lesson home. Her knees buckled slightly, and she sank back into the chair. Mama, please. I didn't know. You did know, I said softly. You knew what you were doing. You chose it anyway. And now, you will see what it means to build your destiny on someone else's life. The room felt heavy, almost suffocating with the weight of what had been said. I could see it in her eyes, the dawning horror, the realization that the world had just shifted under her feet. She had thought herself clever. She had thought me naive. And now she was learning that she had underestimated the quiet resolve of a woman who had fought every hardship life had thrown at her. I poured myself a cup of tea and sipped slowly, watching her unravel in silence. Every detail mattered. The way she fumbled with her laptop, the way her fingers trembled when she tried to text someone in desperation. She had believed technology made her untouchable, but I had discovered that human patience and careful strategy were far more powerful than any app or password. The next few days were a strange sort of calm. Danielle barely spoke, mostly avoiding me, pretending that her life wasn't unraveling. But I watched. I listened. I learned. Every misstep she made, every frantic call she placed, every anxious glance toward my home, it was all part of the lesson she was about to receive. I began quietly preparing. There were new bank accounts to set up, new identities to protect, paperwork to file with my attorney friend, and strategies to reverse the control she had assumed over my life. Every day, I wrote lists, made phone calls, and logged transactions carefully, making sure my actions were invisible, untraceable. And the most delicious part? Danielle had no idea. She still thought she was in control, still thought her panic and tears would compel me to negotiate, to forgive, to beg. She didn't know that the calmest, quietest woman in the room was about to change everything. One evening, as the sun set in a blaze of orange and purple over the Atlanta skyline, Danielle broke down completely. She cried openly on the sofa, her hands clutching her hair, murmuring apologies that no longer mattered. I sat across from her, calm, serene, and untouchable. Do you understand now? I asked softly. Do you understand what happens when you try to play with someone's life like it's a game? She nodded, too exhausted to speak, too fearful to protest. And I smiled, not with cruelty, but with quiet satisfaction. Not for revenge's sake, but for justice. She had crossed a line, and now she would see the world from a perspective she had never imagined, powerless. That night, I went to bed early, the faint hum of the city outside my window. I felt no bitterness, only purpose. I had spent decades building a life of integrity, patience, and resilience. And now, for the first time in a long while, the scales were about to tip in my favor. I knew the next moves would be delicate, strategic. One wrong step, and Danielle could still escape accountability. But I was ready. I had learned, I had prepared, and I was patient. Because patience, I realized, is the most powerful weapon a person can wield. And when it's paired with justice, it can change destiny. The first thing I did when I woke that morning was check my new account. Every number, every transaction, every login felt like a small victory. The relief was sweet, but it was short-lived. I knew Danielle wouldn't stay quiet for long. She was clever, resourceful, and desperate, and desperation makes people dangerous. I sipped my tea and watched the sun rise over the rooftops of my quiet Atlanta neighborhood. The world seemed ordinary, as if nothing had happened. But nothing could have been further from the truth. My life, my savings, my dignity, all had been threatened by the one person I had trusted above all. And now, The one person I trusted was about to see what it meant to have their world turned upside down. I dressed slowly, deliberately, as if preparing for a battle that required no weapons other than patience, wit, and intelligence. My hair was pulled back, my glasses perched firmly on my nose, and my expression calm. Calm, I reminded myself, is the most dangerous mask. Danielle had always thought she knew the woman I was. She thought she had the upper hand because she could type, click, and manipulate numbers faster than I could count. She was wrong. She had underestimated the quiet, calculating strength of a mother who had survived far worse than a little betrayal. By mid-morning, I was at the library. Miss Carroll, the librarian, raised an eyebrow at me. "You're here early today, Marge," she said. "I have work to do," I said simply, and sat up at my usual corner. I pulled out my yellow legal pad, a pen, and a notebook filled with passwords, account numbers, and the strategies I had devised over the past week. The library was quiet, save for the soft tapping of keyboards and the rustling of pages. I logged into my new email, created a series of complex passwords, and set up two-factor authentication. Each step I took made me feel more powerful, more in control. I was no longer a passive participant in my life. I was the architect of my own destiny. But I didn't stop there. Danielle had made mistakes. Big ones, but she hadn't thought about the consequences. She had left digital footprints, traces of her actions that were visible if you knew where to look. I began tracing them, carefully noting every transaction she had authorized, every shell account she had created, and every name she had used. By lunchtime, I had enough information to make a plan. I closed my notebook and leaned back in my chair. This wasn't about revenge in the petty sense. It was about justice. Danielle had stolen from me, manipulated me, and assumed that her cleverness could shield her from accountability. She was about to learn that life has a way of balancing the scales, even for those who think themselves untouchable. I returned home and went straight to my friend Lydia's house. Lydia had been a retired accountant for over 30 years, and she had a sharp mind that I trusted completely. I laid everything out for her, the accounts, the transactions, the unauthorized transfers, and asked for her guidance. "Marjorie," she said, adjusting her glasses, "this isn't just a matter of money. This is fraud, plain and simple. But you've done something very clever. You've created a paper trail that she doesn't know exists. With the right filings, you can make her take responsibility for her actions without ever lifting a finger in anger." I nodded slowly. That was exactly what I had in mind. I didn't want a confrontation. I didn't want screams or tears or pleading. I wanted the law, the system, and the undeniable weight of consequences to do what I couldn't, teach her that the choices she made had real, permanent effects. We spent hours working through the papers. Lydia showed me how to file a series of documents that would secure my remaining assets, reclaim ownership of certain accounts, and ensure that any fraudulent activity traced back to Danielle would reflect on her, not me. Each signature I practiced, each line I read, felt like a strike of justice being carefully carved into place. When I returned home that evening, the sun had begun its slow descent, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. Danielle was there, pretending to read, but I could see the tension in her posture. She thought she was still in control. She didn't know that I had already taken steps that would ensure she could never manipulate me again. She looked up at me with those big, dark eyes. "Mama, are you okay?" she asked, her voice uncertain. I smiled, faint and calm. "I'm fine, baby. Just tired from a long day." She nodded and returned to her reading, unaware that every move she made, every careless glance, was being observed, noted, and calculated. She thought she had power over me. She didn't know that power is only meaningful when wielded wisely, and patience is the sharpest sword of all. The following week, I moved quietly, methodically. I opened a second account, this one under a name Danielle didn't know I still used, my maiden name, Marjorie Brooks. I transferred small amounts at first, testing the waters, ensuring that every transaction went unnoticed. I changed phone numbers, email addresses, and security questions. By the time Danielle realized anything, it would be too late. I watched her carefully, noting her habits. She checked her emails obsessively, pacing the living room, muttering to herself. Her once confident stride had grown uncertain. Her fingers trembled when she scrolled through financial apps. And each time she glanced at me, I saw the fleeting recognition of something she hadn't fully understood before. I was no longer a passive target. I continued my lessons with Miss Carroll at the library. Every morning, I spent hours learning new techniques, discovering loopholes, and understanding the complex web of digital finance that Danielle had assumed was her playground. I learned to mask my IP, to track digital footprints, to secure communications. I became invisible, untouchable, and entirely prepared. And all the while, Danielle's behavior grew more erratic. She began to call the bank more often, asking questions about transfers she had authorized, trying to find a way to reclaim control. Each call, each frantic message, only confirmed for me that my strategy was working. She was realizing, slowly and painfully, that the woman she had underestimated was not just awake, but fully aware of every move she had made. One evening, I received a notice from my bank, an unusual attempt to access my accounts.
I didn't panic.
Instead, I smiled. This was her, finally discovering that the fortress I had built around my finances was impenetrable. She didn't know I had already secured every possible angle, that every transaction she attempted to reverse would only highlight her own culpability. That night, I poured myself a cup of tea and sat on the porch, watching the stars emerge one by one. The breeze carried the scent of jasmine and magnolia, and for the first time in months, I felt a sense of calm satisfaction. I wasn't angry. I wasn't vengeful. I was simply ready. I thought about Danielle, about the lessons she had yet to learn. She had believed that cleverness alone could shield her from consequence. She had not counted on patience, diligence, and the quiet power of a woman who refuses to be broken. The next morning, I began drafting letters to my attorney, setting in motion the legal filings that would ensure Danielle bore the consequences of her actions. Each page I filled was deliberate, each word chosen with care. This was not about anger. It was about justice. By the end of the week, the foundation of my plan was complete. My accounts were secure, my identity protected, and every document necessary to reclaim ownership of any fraudulent activity was in place. Danielle was unaware that every step she had taken to manipulate me was now a thread in the net I had quietly woven around her. I watched her pace in the living room that evening, her expression a mixture of frustration and growing fear. She had sensed a shift, a subtle change in the balance of power, but she didn't understand its magnitude. She thought she was still in control, but she wasn't. The most satisfying moment came quietly, without fanfare. Danielle sent me a text, pleading for my assistance with a transfer she couldn't complete. I read it, set my tea down, and smiled faintly. I didn't respond. I didn't have to. The law, the system, and her own recklessness would do what I could not. That night, as I prepared for bed, I reflected on the irony of it all. Danielle had believed herself cleverer than her mother, smarter, faster, untouchable. And yet, she had overlooked the one thing that cannot be replicated by skill alone: patience, intelligence, and the quiet resolve of a woman who has faced life's hardest battles and survived. I closed my eyes, letting the satisfaction wash over me. There was no joy in her suffering, only the calm reassurance that justice, when carefully administered, is its own reward. And I knew that the next chapter of the story, of Danielle's reckoning, was only just beginning. She had built her empire on my trust and my resources, and now, every move she made would be a step into the consequences she had so carelessly ignored. I was ready, and Danielle, she had no idea what was coming. The morning sun streamed through my kitchen window, painting the counters in warm gold. I sipped my coffee slowly, savoring the silence, the calm. Danielle wasn't here yet, and I wasn't going to see her. Not today, not for a while. She had become unpredictable.
Panicked.
And panic is the loudest sound a person can make, even when they're silent. I had spent the past week meticulously organizing everything. Every transaction she'd made without my consent, every account she'd touched, Every digital signature she thought she'd covered. I had documented it all. I had to be precise. One misstep, one missed detail, and her reckoning would be delayed or worse, incomplete. But I was thorough. I'd never allowed myself to be anything less. By 10 in the morning, I was seated in my favorite corner of my living room, my legal pad open, a stack of documents beside me. I had an appointment with Mr. Klein, my attorney and a man I trusted implicitly, and I knew that with his guidance, the plan I had quietly built would finally move into motion. He arrived promptly, briefcase in hand, his gray hair slicked back, his suit perfectly pressed. He greeted me warmly, but I could see the subtle tension in his eyes as I handed him the folder of documents. "Mrs. Whitfield," he said, flipping through the pages, "this is extensive. You've really covered everything." I nodded. I've been planning carefully. I've watched every move she made, traced every footprint, and compiled the proof. He looked up, meeting my eyes. "You're sure you want to proceed this way?" I smiled faintly, the curve of my lips deliberate. "I'm sure. This isn't about revenge, Mr. Klein. This is about justice. About responsibility. Danielle needs to understand the consequences of her actions, and I intend to make that clear." He sighed, leaning back slightly. "Very well. Here's what we'll do. We'll file the necessary documents to reclaim ownership of the accounts she manipulated, secure your assets, and submit evidence to the IRS. You'll be listed as the responsible party for all legitimate holdings, and she'll be the one accountable for any discrepancies or fraudulent activity. Done right, this will be irreversible." I took a deep breath, letting the weight of those words settle. Irreversible. That was exactly what I wanted. Danielle had spent weeks thinking she had control over my life, my money, my peace of mind. She had believed herself clever, untouchable. But she hadn't considered one thing. I had patience, knowledge, and the foresight to let the law do its work. We spent the next several hours drafting documents, filing forms, double-checking every detail. Mr. Klein explained each step, how it would unfold, what Danielle would see, and what she would never know. He called it a quiet storm.
I liked that.
Quiet storms are the most powerful. They move silently, unseen, and yet leave irreversible change in their wake. By the time he left, the sun was dipping low in the sky, casting long shadows across the room. I leaned back in my chair, my hands folded neatly in my lap, and let out a quiet breath. The first phase was complete. The next phase would be watching, waiting, letting her unravel at her own pace. Danielle, of course, had no idea. She called that evening, her voice tight, brittle. "Mama, I don't understand. Some of my accounts aren't showing up right. I think there's a problem." I sipped my tea calmly, placing the cup down slowly. "What kind of problem, baby?" Her voice trembled. "I don't know, some transfers I tried to make aren't going through." I let a small smile curve my lips. "Maybe it's time you looked at things from a different perspective, darling. Sometimes the path you choose for yourself isn't as smooth as you think." She didn't respond for a long moment, then whispered, "Mama, I don't know what to do." "Take a deep breath," I said softly. "You'll figure it out." I hung up before she could say anything else. That tiny spark of panic in her voice was the first taste of justice. She didn't know it yet, but she had stepped into the consequences she had earned. The following days were a delicate dance. I maintained my calm, serene exterior, while Danielle fumbled, stumbled, and panicked in ways she never had before. I watched her from a distance, carefully noting each reaction, each frantic message to friends and colleagues. She was unraveling, slowly, and it was mesmerizing to observe. One afternoon, I decided to check the status of the filings we had submitted to the IRS. I logged into my secure account and reviewed the responses. Everything was moving exactly as planned. Her business accounts had been flagged for discrepancies, her personal accounts were under review, and the shell companies she had tried to use for convenience were now linked directly to her name. She had created the trap, and now she was stepping into it with no idea that I had removed myself from the crosshairs entirely. Every attempt she made to fix things only tightened the net. I paused, letting the quiet satisfaction wash over me. There was no gloating in my heart, only the steady, undeniable sense that justice, when carefully and patiently administered, is more powerful than anger or hate. By the end of the week, Danielle had realized something was very wrong. She called repeatedly, left messages, even stopped by unannounced. Each time, I greeted her with calm composure, poured her tea, and listened quietly as she muttered apologies, excuses, and pleas. She didn't know that the law, the system, and my own meticulous planning had already begun to tip the balance. One evening, she sat across from me, her hands fidgeting in her lap. "Ma, I think I made a huge mistake. I don't know how to fix it." I studied her silently, letting her words hang in the air. Then I leaned forward slightly, resting my hands on the table. "Danielle," I said quietly, "you have to understand something. Life isn't about cleverness alone. It's about responsibility. You can't take what isn't yours and expect the world to forgive you. You can't manipulate someone's life and think it won't catch up to you." Her shoulders slumped, and she finally looked at me, truly looked at me, with wide, fearful eyes. "Mom?" "Sure," I said softly, holding up a finger. "Don't speak yet. Listen.
Watch.
Learn. This is how you understand what it means to live with the consequences of your choices." She didn't protest. She was too afraid, too aware that I had shifted the balance of power. She didn't know how far I had gone, how many steps I had taken to ensure that she could never manipulate me again, but she felt the weight of it. And that, I realized, was enough. That night, I sat by my window, looking out over the city lights. I thought about the years I had sacrificed, the nights I had gone hungry so she could have dinner, the jobs I had taken so she could have school clothes and textbooks. And now, after all she had done, I felt no bitterness, only a deep, calm satisfaction. She would learn the lesson she needed to learn. She would face the consequences she had ignored. Over the next few weeks, I monitored every filing, every response, every update from the banks and the IRS. Danielle's panic grew with each passing day. She called frantic meetings with her accountant, spent hours on hold with customer service, and even hired a private investigator to trace her missing funds. Every attempt was futile. Every frantic move only confirmed the inevitability of her reckoning. One morning, I received a notification. One of her shell companies had been flagged for tax fraud, with her name listed as the responsible party. I sipped my coffee slowly, savoring the moment. This was just the beginning. The dominoes were starting to fall, and she had no idea who had tipped them. Danielle tried to confront me again that afternoon. She barged into my kitchen, her face pale, her hands trembling. "Mama, this is serious. I need your help." I looked at her calmly, letting the silence stretch between us. Finally, I said, "You made this problem, Danielle. Now you have to solve it. I can't help you with what you created through deceit." Her lips quivered. "Mama, please? I don't know what to do." "You'll figure it out," I said quietly, turning back to my tea. "You always do, when the consequences are yours alone." She stared at me, panic and realization in her eyes. And in that moment, I knew she finally understood that the tables had turned. She had underestimated me, and now she was paying the price. Slowly, carefully, justice was being served. I finished my tea and walked to the porch, watching the sun dip below the horizon. The air was warm, scented with jasmine and magnolia, and I felt an unusual lightness in my chest. I had done nothing cruel. I had not yelled, pleaded, or even threatened. I had let patience, knowledge, and quiet strategy do the work that anger alone could not achieve. And as the first stars appeared in the twilight sky, I knew one thing for certain. The lesson Danielle needed to learn had begun, and it would be unforgettable. I woke that morning to the sound of my phone buzzing incessantly.
"Danielle."
I didn't answer. Not yet. I knew better than to feed into her panic. Let her call. Let her fume. Let her realize, minute by minute, how deeply she had trapped herself. I poured my coffee and sat at the kitchen table, looking out at the quiet street. The autumn leaves rustled in the breeze, golden and crisp, a sharp contrast to the storm brewing in my home. Danielle had spent the past week flailing. Bank accounts frozen, shell companies flagged, her business teetering on the edge of legal scrutiny. I'd watched it all unfold with calm detachment, savoring the moment when she would finally understand that her cleverness alone could not save her. Her first mistake was thinking she could manipulate me. Her second was believing she could outsmart the system. And her third, her most dangerous, was underestimating the resolve of a mother who had survived far worse than her childish deceit. By mid-morning, I decided it was time to move to the next phase. I had filed all the paperwork, secured my new accounts, and created a trail that would lead every suspicious transaction back to her. But legal filings and digital maneuvers weren't enough. Danielle needed to feel the weight of her choices. She needed to see the consequences in her own life. I made a list. It was simple, straightforward, and mercilessly effective. Monitor, observe, ensure accountability, and let her panic grow in real time. The law and the system would do the rest. It wasn't long before I saw the first tangible results. Danielle tried to access one of her accounts to cover a business expense, only to find it locked. She called the bank repeatedly, each time more frantic than the last. Her voice cracked, and I could hear the sharp edge of desperation in every word. She didn't know that every lock, every denial, every hold had been orchestrated to make her confront the reality she had created. She showed up at my door mid-afternoon, her heels scuffing against the walkway. I didn't greet her immediately. I let her fume, pacing on my porch, hands wringing at her sides. I could hear the tremor in her voice before she even opened the door. "Mama, you have to help me," she demanded as soon as she stepped inside. I don't know what's going on. I've tried everything. The accounts, everything is frozen. Please, tell me you can fix this." I stood, pouring her a cup of tea with deliberate calm. "Danielle, sit down," I said softly, sliding the mug across the table. "You've done this to yourself. I can't fix what you've broken." Her shoulders sagged, the fight draining out of her. She looked at me like I was the enemy she had never truly understood. "Mom, I didn't mean for any of this to happen. I thought I was helping." "You thought wrong," I said gently. "Helping implies consent. You moved money without permission. You assumed control over someone else's life. That is not help. That is theft. That is deception." She swallowed hard, tears brimming in her eyes. I didn't know it would get this bad. I leaned back in my chair, letting her panic sit in the room like a tangible thing. "Now you know," I said quietly. "Now you understand that your choices have real consequences. You've been playing a game with my life, my security, my peace of mind. And that game is over." For a moment, silence fell. Danielle's breathing was rapid, shallow, and I knew she was finally beginning to grasp the scope of her actions. Her cleverness, her manipulation, her sense of entitlement, all crumbling before the reality she had created for herself. You're going to make me pay for this?" she whispered, fear lacing her voice. "I've done nothing," I said, calmly setting my teacup down. "The law will handle it. The banks will handle it. You have done this to yourself, Danielle. All I've done is ensure the consequences reach you." She flinched as though struck. "Mama, please? I can't. I don't." "You can't do anything now," I said softly, meeting her gaze steadily. "Not until you understand that actions have consequences. You can beg, plead, and panic, but the truth is this: you made your choices. You have to live with them." Her hands shook as she gripped the edge of the table. I could see her calculating, thinking, desperate to find a way out, a loophole, a miracle. But there was none. Every path she considered was accounted for, every escape route blocked by my meticulous planning. That evening, I watched her pace through my living room, checking her phone, muttering under her breath, making frantic calls. Her panic was intoxicating, not for me personally, but in the sense that justice had finally found its form. I had been calm, patient, methodical, and the results were more satisfying than any display of anger could have been. I spent that night reviewing every transaction, every filing, every lock I had placed on the accounts. Danielle was a clever woman, but she had never accounted for patience, foresight, or a mother's meticulous nature. She had underestimated me from the beginning, and now she was paying the price. By the following week, the dominoes had begun to fall in earnest. Her shell companies were under scrutiny, her personal accounts were frozen intermittently for review, and the IRS had begun sending notifications directly to her. Every panic-stricken call she made, every email she sent, was a testament to her desperation. And I observed, silently, as the weight of her actions crushed her confidence. One morning, as I prepared breakfast, Danielle appeared at my door once more, her face pale, her hands trembling. "Mama, the IRS, my business. Everything is on hold. They're threatening fines, penalties. I don't know what to do." I poured her a cup of tea and handed it to her without a word. I watched her tremble as she took it, her eyes wide with fear and uncertainty. "Sit," I said softly. "You need to calm down before you make things worse." She sat, shivering slightly, as I continued my calm, deliberate routine. "Danielle," I said quietly, "every step you took to manipulate my life has consequences. Every shortcut you tried to take has led you here, and now you are facing the results." She buried her face in her hands. "Mama, please, I'm begging you, help me." I leaned forward, my voice measured. "I have not caused this, Danielle. You did. All I have done is ensure that the law, the banks, and your own actions hold you accountable. You wanted control. You wanted power. And now you have it in full measure. You have the power to face your mistakes and nothing more." Her lips trembled as she whispered, "I didn't know. I never thought." "You never thought because you never considered the consequences," I said gently. "That is the lesson. That is the truth. And it is inescapable." She looked up at me, eyes filled with a mixture of fear and dawning comprehension. I could see it. The moment she realized that every maneuver she had made to manipulate and deceive me had been met with foresight, patience, and unyielding strategy. She had assumed she controlled the game, but she had never realized that the board was mine to command, and the pieces were already moving according to my plan. Over the next few days, Danielle's desperation escalated. She made frantic calls to accountants, lawyers, and even friends, trying to untangle the web she had woven. Each attempt failed. Each failure only reinforced the lesson she had been slow to learn. I observed quietly, calmly. I no longer felt the sting of betrayal, only the satisfaction of justice unfolding. Danielle had spent years believing that she could manipulate, control, and exploit the love and trust one had given her. And now she was learning, painfully and irrevocably, that actions have consequences that cannot be escaped. One evening, as the city lights flickered on outside my window, Danielle sat across from me in silence. Her hands were folded tightly in her lap, her eyes fixed on the table. She had finally stopped trying to fight, to explain, to bargain. She had reached the point of true understanding, fear, accountability, and the recognition of the power I held quietly all along. "Mama," she whispered finally, her voice barely audible. I understand. I'm sorry." I looked at her steadily. "Sorry is a start," I said softly. "But understanding is what counts. You cannot erase what you've done. You can only learn, face it, and move forward with honesty and integrity. That is how you rebuild." Tears ran down her cheeks as she nodded, finally accepting the gravity of her situation. I poured myself another cup of tea, calm and serene, watching the sunset as the first stars appeared in the night sky. The lesson was not cruel, nor was it vengeful. It was inevitable, and it had arrived. Danielle had learned, finally, that the world does not bend to cleverness alone. That manipulation has limits. That every choice carries weight. And most importantly, that a mother who has faced life's hardest battles will not be underestimated, ignored, or taken for granted. I smiled faintly, the warmth of satisfaction spreading through me. Justice had arrived quietly, patiently, and it had worked flawlessly. Danielle's reckoning was real, and it was complete. The morning sun felt unusually bright that day, cutting through my curtains and illuminating every corner of my home. I stood in the kitchen, cup of coffee in hand, and watched Danielle pace through the living room like a caged animal. Her phone buzzed constantly, notifications lighting up the screen, each one a hammer striking at the foundation of her panic. She had realized, finally, that she was trapped. Not physically, but financially, legally, and emotionally. Every move she made to regain control backfired. Every attempt to manipulate or plead ended in frustration. I watched her quietly, silently, letting her unravel under the weight of her own choices. I had waited for this moment for weeks, and now it had arrived. "Mama, please," she whispered, voice trembling as she finally collapsed into the armchair. I don't know what to do. Everything is frozen. I can't access the accounts, the IRS, it's all coming for me. I placed my coffee on the counter and approached her slowly. "Danielle," I said, calm and deliberate, "this is what happens when you make choices without considering the consequences. You wanted control. You wanted power. You thought you could manipulate me, take from me, use me as a stepping stone. But you forgot one thing. Patience and strategy are stronger than cleverness." Her eyes darted toward me, wild, fearful. "Mama, I need help. You have to do something." I shook my head gently. "I cannot. I did not create this situation, you did. All I've done is ensure that the consequences of your actions reach you fully and undeniably. Every step you took against me has been documented, every action traced, every transaction accounted for. You cannot escape what you have done." Tears rolled down her cheeks. "I didn't mean to hurt you. I wanted to help. I thought I was doing the right thing." "You thought wrong," I interrupted, my voice steady. "And that thinking has led you here. Now you're going to face reality. And reality doesn't bend for excuses." She buried her face in her hands. I watched silently, letting her panic settle around her like a thick fog. I could see the storm in her mind, the realization that everything she had relied upon, her cleverness, her speed, her digital skills, was meaningless against patience, foresight, and a meticulous plan. She was finally learning what I had known for decades. Actions have consequences, and they do not discriminate. For a long while, neither of us spoke. I poured myself another cup of coffee, the steam curling gently in the morning light. Danielle's sobs filled the silence, and I realized that she was no longer trying to escape the consequences. She was absorbing them, painfully, deeply, and fully. "Do you understand now?" I asked softly, sitting across from her. "Do you understand the impact of your choices?" She lifted her head, eyes red and swollen, and nodded slowly. I see it now. I see everything. Mama, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean. Sorry doesn't erase the past, I said gently, but understanding is the first step toward making amends. You have to face what you've done and rebuild with honesty. You have to learn to respect trust, responsibility, and the lives of others. That is the lesson you must carry forward. She was silent for a moment, as though the weight of those words had pressed her down into the chair. Mama, will I be okay? She asked finally, voice trembling. You will be, I said, leaning forward and placing a hand on hers. But it will take time. And you must take responsibility for every misstep. You cannot rely on shortcuts, tricks, or manipulation. You must face the truth, own your mistakes, and rebuild honestly. That is the only way forward. Her lips quivered. I understand. I promise to try. I nodded. That was enough for now. The law, the banks, and the careful steps I had taken would ensure that she felt the consequences fully. My part was done. I had guided her into a position where she had to reckon with reality. There was no cruelty in my actions, only justice, and finally, a clear line had been drawn. Over the next few days, Danielle's panic escalated. Every attempt she made to regain control failed. The IRS continued to flag her accounts, the banks blocked transfers, and her once profitable business teetered on the edge. Each step she took only reinforced the lesson she had fought to avoid. One evening, she sat quietly at the dining table, staring blankly at the papers I had left for her to review. Mama, everything, it's all wrong. I can't fix this. I poured myself a cup of tea and joined her at the table. Danielle, this is your world now. Every choice you made has consequences. Every attempt to manipulate or deceive has led you here. You cannot undo what you've done. You can only learn from it. And that is what you must do if you want to rebuild. She shivered slightly, the weight of reality pressing down on her. I didn't know. I didn't realize. I thought I could handle it. You thought you could, I said softly. But now you know you cannot. Not without integrity, not without responsibility, and not without honesty. That is the difference between cleverness and true strength. You are learning that now, and it is a painful lesson, but an important one. For the first time, I saw her truly understand. The frantic energy, the wild desperation, the frantic scrambling, all of it had faded, replaced by a quiet, fearful realization. She had been reckless, careless, and presumptuous. She had taken what was not hers, assumed control she did not deserve, and ignored the wisdom of experience. Now she was seeing the truth. I leaned back, taking a slow sip of tea. I felt no satisfaction in her suffering, only the calm assurance that justice had been served. She would rebuild if she had the courage, but she would rebuild with understanding and respect, not manipulation or entitlement. The next day, I received a call from one of her accountants. Danielle had requested the transfer of certain funds, but the accounts were locked, flagged, and fully under review. Every step she took only confirmed the system was working against her because of her own actions. When Danielle saw me later that evening, her face was pale, her hands trembling. Mama, I don't know what to do. Every move I make it's all wrong. I'm losing everything. I poured her a cup of tea, placing it carefully in front of her. You are learning, I said softly. The path you chose is difficult because it is the truth. You wanted shortcuts, manipulation, and control. And now you are discovering that life does not reward deceit. It rewards honesty, patience, and integrity. You are learning that now, and that is your opportunity to change. She stared at me, eyes wide, as the reality sank in. Her pride, her sense of entitlement, her belief that cleverness alone could shield her from consequence. All of it was gone. She was humbled, and for the first time, she understood the power of accountability. Over the following weeks, Danielle worked tirelessly to repair the damage she had done. She met with accountants, lawyers, and financial advisors, carefully tracing every step, correcting every error, and accepting responsibility for her choices. Every phone call, every email, every interaction reinforced the lesson. She could no longer rely on shortcuts or manipulation. She had to face life honestly. I observed quietly, calmly, from the sidelines. I offered advice when asked, guidance when necessary, but never interference. I had done my part, ensured that she faced the consequences and could not escape the lessons she needed to learn. Now it was up to her to act responsibly, rebuild her reputation, and make amends for the mistakes she had made. One evening, after a particularly long day of meetings and calls, Danielle sat across from me at the kitchen table. Her eyes were red from crying, her hands folded neatly in her lap. Mama, I think I understand now. I see everything. I'm so sorry. I reached across the table and took her hands in mine. Sorry is the beginning, Danielle. Understanding is the true start. You cannot erase the past, but you can rebuild. You can learn from this. And if you do, you will emerge stronger, wiser, and more responsible than you ever were before. Her lips trembled as tears fell. I promise, Mama, I will never take shortcuts again. I will never manipulate or deceive. I'll be honest, even when it's hard. I nodded, a small, gentle smile forming on my lips. That is all I ever wanted, Danielle. For you to understand responsibility, respect, and integrity. That is the lesson you needed to learn, and now you have. The next morning, I woke early, brewed my coffee, and stood on the porch, watching the city wake. Danielle was inside, working quietly, carefully, responsibly. She had learned her lesson, and the chaos had transformed into understanding. She had rebuilt not just her finances, but her approach to life. And as I watched her, I felt a quiet satisfaction, not in her suffering, but in the fact that justice had been delivered calmly, patiently, and wisely. She had faced the consequences she deserved, and she had emerged ready to live with integrity. For the first time in months, I felt peace. The betrayal, the panic, the manipulation, it had all been resolved. Danielle had learned her lesson, and I had reclaimed my life, my dignity, and my peace of mind. The lesson had been harsh, the journey dramatic, and the consequences unavoidable. But in the end, responsibility had prevailed. Integrity had prevailed. And for the first time in a long while, I felt the calm power of someone who had faced deception, betrayal, and manipulation, and emerged victorious, with patience, strategy, and quiet strength as her guide. If you've been captivated by Marjorie's strength, patience, and clever strategy, like this video, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you won't miss more stories like this. Comment below where you're watching from. I'd love to see how far this story reaches.